Hello, everyone. I am Mike. Before I get started on this tragic narrative, I'd like to give you some history on myself and my ex-wife, Emma. I stand at 510 pounds and weigh 180 pounds less. I stay active by running 2 laps around the park every morning when work allows. In addition, I swim many miles per week and visit a traditional gym twice a week for weightlifting and MMA training. While I'm not quite Bruce Lee, the most of my 180 lifetimes revolve around muscle. Some claim I resemble George Clooney. I have a master's degree in computer technology, a postgraduate degree in business management, and a bachelor's degree in economics, all from Oxford University in England. My father served in the U.S. Embassy as a translator, which first led us to England. After his service, he went to the United States, but I chose to stay. To finish my degree, I currently own and operate my own computer repair business. In addition, I'm working on a new core software that will cater to a wide range of applications from gaming to military. Its main characteristic is its real-time problem-solving capabilities. It should be ready for implementation within the next 6 to 12 months. My younger sister, Patricia, is 2 years younger than me, known as Party Pat. I enjoy our intimate relationship. We discuss everything and have no secrets from one another. She currently works as a junior partner at a prestigious law firm in New York. State Emma, my ex-wife, is 5'3" in tall and weighs 110 pounds. She maintains her thin shape by going to the gym at least 4 times per week, and she has an angelic face. Her smile lights up any room. Emma's features are striking: a 34B chest, a 22 tweed waist, and 33 hips, with red hair and green eyes. She has a temper that matches her fiery appearance. Emma has a law degree and works as a corporate attorney for XYZ, a public relations advertising business. Emma and I met for the first time at Pat's graduation ceremony. Pat and Emma's sister Fiona were dorm roommates, and they introduced us at the graduation party. Surprisingly, we realized that we lived only 3 miles away in the same mid-size town, Freestone, Texas. Our connection was immediate, and we started dating 6 months. Later, we tied the knot. Emma started her career at X, Y, and Z as a junior attorney, earning a modest 5-figure salary plus bonuses, while I worked as a software code compiler and DX compiler for ABC flight controllers, earning a reasonable 5-figure salary plus bonuses. We lived in a beautiful neighborhood in the 3-bedroom house left to me by my grandparents. Pat received a big sum inheritance despite Emma's parents and sister residing in New York. My folks had moved to Florida after retiring. We met with our different families around twice a year, alternating between Thanksgiving and Christmas, with comfortable wages, good automobiles, and biannual trips. We lived a contented existence. Jen's advancement to junior partner came 2 years into her work and represented a turning point. She started working late and would occasionally join her buddies for Friday night activities. Naturally, I became suspicious and resorted to normal actions like as inspecting her possessions, reading her emails, and even placing a keylogger on her laptop. Putting paranoia aside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with our marriage. Despite discovering no evidence of impropriety, I followed Jen one evening while she prospered in her work and aimed to become a senior partner within 5 years, only to find myself locked in a dead-end job at a family-owned corporation where advancements were reserved for relatives regardless of merit. Frustrated by the lack of prospects for promotion, I decided to start my own business specializing in corporate computer repair and security improvements. Unlike traditional repair shops, my primary focus was on improving systems and adding high-quality security measures. Despite expecting a delayed start, my business study predicted considerable earnings within a year, exceeding my existing income. I sat down with Jen and tried to explain that the approaching year would be difficult, but all predictions suggested that we will eventually benefit in the long run. To avoid complicating matters, I decided not to mention the new project I was working on. She was adamantly opposed to the plan, asking why we should risk everything when things were going so well. She seemed to be thriving, whereas I felt trapped in a dead-end job. Jen and I had always kept our funds separate, save for our joint account, which paid all of our costs every month. We both donated an equal amount to cover half of the expenses and kept the rest for ourselves. I left for my job and began my new venture with my savings and a home equity loan. I rented a small workshop with an accompanying office and began marketing and making phone calls. Within 3 months, I had broken even and felt satisfied at the same time. I was making good headway on the new project. Then one evening, Jen dropped a surprise. She told me she was 3 months pregnant and expecting twins. My concern prompted me to check the calendar, and to my amazement, I learned that she had been in Miami for a week on business during the time of conception. At that point, I suspected infidelity and resolved to schedule a DNA test as quickly as possible. As soon as she realized she was pregnant, she discontinued all intimate interaction, at least with me, citing concerns for the child's safety. I convinced her that she was overreacting and even had the doctor confirm it, but she remained solid in her decision, resulting in at least a 6-month dry spell for me. I helped her during her pregnancy by attending relaxation classes, applying oil to her swelling tummy to prevent stretch marks, massaging her feet every night, and tolerating her increasingly regular mood swing things. Meanwhile, my business was prospering. I hired Greg, a recent college graduate, to help with computers, and May came as a receptionist. I never discussed my business with Jen because she didn't appear interested. The call came one afternoon while I was meeting with a client to discuss server upgrades. The baby was on its way, and I had to run to the hospital. I explained the situation to the client, who was kind and praised me before dismissing me for a few weeks. I had expected this time and was prepared. Jen did not need to call an ambulance because I was so close to home. When I got home, I found Jen ready with her go bag. After she was situated in the car, I got her bag and the DNA kit. Before driving her to the hospital after a doctor's checkup, she was admitted to a pregnant ward with her own private room. Despite my misgivings about the twins' paternity, I was still delighted about becoming a father. The doctor encouraged me to go home because it would still be a while until delivery, so I departed, had a bite to eat, and waited till I fell asleep. Suddenly, the hospital called. Jen was fully dilated with contractions every 7 minutes, and the birth was approaching. I rushed to the hospital early in the morning, donning a coat and, arriving in record time, guided by a nurse, I entered the delivery room where I discovered my wife in labor and saw the birth of our babies. As the nurse checked on them to ensure their well-being, I surreptitiously gathered DNA samples from each youngster for testing, though I already felt a connection to them. I needed to confirm paternity. I approached Jen and gave her a sweet kiss, but I observed pain in her eyes as she professed her love. I was eventually asked to leave since Jen had been brought to the recovery unit for rest. The next day, I called everyone to give the wonderful news. The grandparents were pleased and could not wait to see their grandchildren. Pat and Fiona indicated that they would try to take some time off to visit their nieces and nephew. I went to the hospital with a huge bouquet for Jen and dropped off the DNA kit along the way. According to the information provided, the findings would take around 10 days to appear. The doctor advised me that Jen would remain in the hospital since she had extensive tearing due to her size and needed time to mend over the next 5 days. I paid her numerous visits, but she appeared preoccupied and aloof. Concerned, I inquired about her conduct, and the doctor assured me that it was typical and that she would eventually recover. When I saw her on Friday, the doctor told me she'd be discharged on Saturday afternoon. I had finished preparing the nursery for our new babies and was looking forward to bringing them home Saturday morning. I confirmed that the safety cribs were securely secured and that everything was ready for her return. At 1:30, I went to the hospital to get my family. I arrived to her room to find it empty. Concerned, I inquired with the nurse about the location of my wife and children. To my surprise, I discovered that they had been picked up previously by another individual. Despite my inquiries, neither the nurse nor Jen's cell phone provided any information. When the senior nurse interfered, the situation became more serious, prompting the involvement of security and law enforcement. Due to fears of an abduction, authorities investigated surveillance footage, which indicated Jen had departed voluntarily with the man whose identity remained unknown. I was advised to return home and promised that additional contact would follow. I was sitting at home feeling ill and anxiously expecting news. Around 6 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Peeping out, I saw the same two investigators. As I let them in, I observed that none would meet my gaze. I asked about the situation, and the woman answered first, "Mr. Adams, we have visited your wife, and she and the children are safe. However, we cannot reveal their whereabouts. I am truly sorry." Confusion grabbed me. Where's my family? Why is Jenny not answering her phone? What's happening? The male detective spoke next. "I'm sorry to inform you that your wife has left you with the children. She said that her attorney would call you soon again." "I'm so sorry. Please do not take any rash decisions until you hear from her. I hate to see you in difficulty with that. They left me alone." Once more, hollow made my hands tremble, and tears streamed down my cheeks. I had reached the depths of despair. On Sunday morning, I awoke from weeping myself to sleep. I went through the rituals of getting up, showering, dressing, and preparing breakfast. Almost automatically after breakfast, I felt a little better and decided to phone Jen's parents, hoping they could provide some information. Jen's father answered the phone, eagerly assuring me that they planned to visit next weekend. I interrupted him and explained what had happened. He expressed disbelief in Jen's behavior and promised to contact her and get back to me as lunchtime neared. I visited Denny's and ate an unhealthy dinner, a large hamburger fries with onion rings and a beer. Feeling better, I returned home and checked our answering machine for messages, but found none. I turned on the television, but my mind was elsewhere, still attempting to process recent events. I eventually gave up and looked at the clock, realizing it was beyond midnight. So I went to bed. I spent a restless night, unable to clear my head, so I relented. At 6 a.m., got up, showered, and went downstairs for breakfast. The phone rang while I sat watching the news on television. Wondering my next step, Jen's lawyer asked if I could attend a meeting later that day. We agreed on 2 o'clock, and he hung up. Maybe I'd finally get some answers. When I arrived at his office, I was instantly ushered in. I had expected to meet only Jen's attorney, but to my astonishment, my wife and her boss, Carl Prescott, were also sitting on the sofa. Despite my desire for clarification, I refused to break the stillness, first choosing instead to sit and wait. My efforts appeared to unsettle everyone as I had planned, causing the attorney to speak up. "First, Mr. Adams, I've summoned you here to talk about the terms of your divorce from Mrs. Emma Adams. I have a proposal from your wife and Mr. Prescott. In essence, they proposed that she divorce you owing to irreconcilable differences. You would keep your home retirement benefits, all funds, and ownership of your business. Mrs. Adams would keep her assets, but you would also agree to let Mr. Prescott adopt your children. In exchange, Mr. Prescott would put $2 million into any account you choose." I nearly overturned the desk when I stood up. "My children will never be sold, regardless of the price. You can get the women for free. I do not want anything to do with her, so get lost." Emma stood up and spoke with a conciliatory tone. Mark, I never intended to bring you harm, but I know I did, and I sincerely apologize for it. I've been in a long-term relationship with Carl, and we're going to marry. Unfortunately, Carl is unable to have biological children and want to adopt ours. We can provide them with everything they require, including a fantastic home, an excellent education, and a solid start in life. What can you offer an antique? House with a little computer repair shop. You lacked ambition and financial stability. Consider give the youngsters a chance. If you refuse to cooperate, I will take legal action and make sure you lose. Everything Rossa forbids you from visiting your children, saving half of your money, and running a business. It is a no-win situation for you, but at least you will get something out of it, Jen. The house is legally mine. You have no right to it. I have little savings. Therefore, your claim to half of it is meaningless. You earn more as a result. Support will be negligible. I will gladly provide for my children, even if I only see them on occasion. The business is nothing without me, and I do not have $41,000 for you to still see you in court with that. I stood and walked away, leaving three puzzled people in my wake. I went directly to Dan's and ordered dinner and a beer. After that, I returned to my cold, empty house and sat down with a beer to watch television. I was still raging just after 11 when a knock on the door startled me. Up, still stunned, I didn't check the folks before opening it. The door flung open violently, causing me to stagger back, but I managed to keep upright. Three men stormed into the room and attempted to grab me. Now fully prepared for combat, I dispatched the first opponent with a single blow. The second one grabbed my head, but I backed away just as the third one struck me, knocking me to the ground, while the first man tried to collect his breath. The other two relentlessly kicked me, causing me to lose consciousness. Fearing for my safety, I chose to leave the evidence to the police. The supervisor asked that I sign the form and threatened to return if I did not do so. In a moment of rebellion, I struck him with my skull, prompting him to withdraw. But thanks to the blow, I still have some of his DNA. Enraged, Kirsten moved away, knocking me out for a bit while. Continuing to kick me, I gradually recovered awareness, hearing voices, but unable to identify the source. Vague shapes filled the room, and my eyesight cleared occasionally before being covered by darkness once more when I awoke. Sunlight shone through the window, illuminating a woman reading in an armchair. It took me a while to recognize her as Cam, the wife of my ma. Attempting to talk through my parched mouth produced only a croak, which Cam noticed and quickly summoned assistance with the call button. A nurse arrived, smiling as she checked my vital signs and inquired about my condition, to which I could only croak a response. After a little interval, she returned with ice chips that tasted better than the finest Scotch. Cam clutched my hand and dialed quickly with the other. I'm glad to see you're back, Mark. You really terrified us. How do you feel? Like I was hit by a truck. A truck might have caused less damage at that time. A doctor entered. I'm relieved to see you awake after a 3-day coma. I believe you have turned a corner. Are you willing to eat anything dark? I could eat an entire cow horn and all. Just make sure it's thoroughly cleaned. Everyone found it amusing, but as I tried to join in the laughter, the pain in my chest inside was so severe that I almost passed out. Before leaving, the doctor increased my pain medication and showed me how to press the button to get more morphine, assuring me of his impending return. I fell into a semi-conscious state induced by the morphine for what felt like hours. Phil informed me about the events that occurred just over an hour before he entered the room. I had been assaulted in my own home, and the Neighborhood Watch Patrol had observed my open front door, sparking an investigation that resulted in the discovery of me laying in a pool of blood. They swiftly phoned an ambulance and the authorities, who discovered Phil's contact information in my phone, which I had saved under ice in case of an emergency. Since then, either he or Cam has been by my side constantly. He advised me that my injuries were pretty severe. I suffered a compound fracture of the left tibia, a fractured radius, 2 broken ribs, a punctured left lung A, burst kidney, a fractured eye socket, and a broken nose. Despite this, he told me that I was all right, which made me laugh, but it also caused me to choke a little. Fortunately, the discomfort was less acute. Once I was declared safe from immediate threat, Cam and Phil left to go home, and a detective entered the room and introduced himself as Detective Graham Coles. He asked about my memories of the attack. I told him everything, and when I mentioned the message conveyed by the AS Salance leader, he was very interested. His interest skyrocketed after learning I had a DNA sample on my handkerchief, which he immediately packed in an evidence bag. After I finished speaking, I momentarily closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, he had vanished, leaving the room in darkness. The next day, Phil paid me a visit and promised me that whenever I was released, I could stay at his house until I regained mobility. I asked him to pick up my mail, and he agreed, saying he'd do it on his way home. Additionally, I inquired about respectable divorce lawyers, and he informed me that he knew one and would contact her. We talked for long until I fell back asleep. The nurse awoke me while changing my bandages, assuring me that they were clean and free of infection. Food arrived quickly, but eating with one arm proved difficult. Necessitating the nurse's assistance, I slept well and awoke feeling refreshed when the nurse gave me a bed bath. Although arousal was out of the question, owing to the discomfort, Phil reappeared with a lovely woman named Grace Miles, whom he introduced as my new attorney. We discussed the problem and confirmed my visiting rights for the children, and she agreed to take on my case. Before leaving, Phil handed me the collected mail, and as I sorted through it, I discovered the DNA results. Initially irritated, I quickly found the situation amusing. Jen had fooled both Carl and myself, as neither child was mine. After discussing this revelation with Phil, we couldn't help but chuckle together. I called Grace and asked for her help in organizing a meeting at the hospital with Jen, Carl, and their lawyer. I had a change of heart and wanted to discuss a solution. She scheduled a meeting in a temporary office for the next day. The look on Jen's face was priceless. Phil wheeled me into the office with my arm and leg covered in plaster and tubes hooked to my body. My face and body were bruised. Jen seemed genuinely surprised by my arrival, whereas Carl simply smirked. Addressing my adversaries, I talked well following a visit from several of your acquaintances. I've reconsidered my position, and Carl, there is no point in denying your involvement. The last words your goon said were, sign the papers. Who else could have said it unless you sent them? My lawyer has written a new document for me to sign, which will allow you to adopt the children, but without the $2 million incentive. You know, my attorney said that your prior document made it appear that I was selling the children to you, which might lead to accusations of human trafficking because it is illegal to sell another human being, but I will give you credit for your efforts. I handed the document to their lawyer, who accepted it with a tinge of remorse, and then I proceeded. My lawyer and I have proposed a new deal for you to consider. It is all outlined here. My lawyer delivered the materials to their lawyer and made copies for Jen and Carl to review. I then addressed them again as, you can see this agreement significantly differs from your plan chalk, differs from cheeselet. Me explain more. First and foremost, I will keep my home and all of its belongings, including my wife's jewels, my funds my business and both cars. In addition, she must put the whole balance of her not-so-secret account with Mertile Credit, which is around $188,000, into my lawyer's holding account. You filthy rascal. That money is rightly mine. I deserved it. You have no right to it, my wife exclaimed abruptly, her face flushed crimson and a throbbing vein in her neck. Carl shot her a perplexed glance. I imagine he was unaware of her private account. I believe this discovery marked the beginning of the end for their relationship. If Carl hadn't been so interested in having children, he might have ended things right there with a smirk. Carl gently nudged her back to her seat. Shut up, you deceitful, cheating woman, and remain seated. The adults are speaking, which does not include you. Everyone was trying hard not to smile, save Phil, who was quietly chuckling. Jen's face changed from red to pale in an instant, but she remained mute now. Before I was rudely interrupted, I was saying that given her much higher wages, she will be compelled to provide me with spousal support in the amount of $20,500 per month directly into my attorney's account. Furthermore, as compensation for dissolving my marriage and INF inflicting my injuries, you will pay me $10 million after taxes, which will be placed into my attorney's account. This figure will pay all of my medical expenses, legal fees, and the whole cost of my aftercare as decided by my attorney. All payments are due by 5:00 p.m. on Friday. Carl stood there, laughing wildly. You are utterly delusional. Why should we pay you anything? We have what we came for, so please leave 20%. What I said, 20%. I heard you the first time. But what does this mean? That is the expected amount of revenue you will lose in the first 2 years following a court case against your company alleging involvement in my marriage's dissolution and family alienation. Did you simply make up that figure out of thin air? No, I thoroughly examined your company's clients and their payments. Your company is publicly traded. All of the material is easily accessible on the website. Consider how it will affect your father's congressional campaign. He is running on a family values platform. Then there's the feedback from your clients, many of whom are political and entertainment figures represented by your public relations firm. If there is even a suggestion of a scandal, they will abandon ship. Furthermore, your advertising department serves high-profile clients such as children's apparel stores, a baby product company, and a sportswear manufacturer. They'll cut ties as soon as things start to go wrong. There will be a board meeting, and you will be the scapegoat. So $10 million is a bargain. Carl's arrogant face evaporated, replaced by a look of sickness. My lawyer will give you the final sum, which must be in her account by 5 o'clock on Friday. No one reacted, but I could tell Carl was still looking for an escape route, so I carried on. And Carl, if you think my disappearance would solve your difficulties, think again. I've shared the full tale with 5 out of state attorneys, and if anything happens to me, they'll tell the media. The look on Carl's face verified my suspicions about his thinking. He appeared completely defeated as we left. I reminded him over my shoulder, 5 p.m. On Friday later, when Grace and I returned to my room, she asked why I gave in and allowed Carl to adopt my children. Despite my previous reservations, I gave her the DNA test results to study, and once she looked them over, she busted out laughing. You crafty devil, the kids are not yours. Who are they? I don't know, but I plan to find out. This demonstrates that she was cheating on both me and Carl simultaneously, and when I realized the truth, Carl will too, Mark. I would hate to be on your bad side. You should have been an attorney. You'd excel at it. Thank you, but I lack a killer instinct, actually. You have it? You simply have not tapped into it yet. Later that day, the doctor came to see me and informed me that I might go home if I could get help. The next day, Phil and Cam offered me temporary accommodations, which I accepted, despite having to visit the hospital twice a week for clothing Chang. Changes in kidney tests Friday was a day I greatly anticipated, however, at 330, my attorney called to advise me that 10,861,312 had been deposited in the holding account. I felt extremely affluent, or at least wealthier than before Grace had already claimed her portion and transferred the balance to my checking account. Life continued after. 8 weeks of loving support from my friends, I came home, but it lacked joy boy. I felt lonely, and the atmosphere was dreary as a result. During a discussion with Greg and myself at work, I chose to relocate closer to my sister, the person I adored the most. I communicated my desire for a fresh start somewhere, and they understood to say goodbye. I congratulated them on their outstanding performance and surprised them by giving them ownership of the company and all. Revenues gained. While I was away, I treated them to dinner next. I went to see my good pals Phil and Cam over. Dinner, I presented them a check for 1,500K to cover my convalescence care. They were initially hesitant, but I explained that Carl's firm was paying the bills, so it was not coming out of my wallet. They accepted. I expressed my ambitions to relocate to New York to be closer to my sister. Over a glass of wine, Phil asked about my house, and I replied that I might rent it out. He was anxious and ultimately confessed that his son Eric, who had recently graduated with an engineering degree, was expecting a kid. With his fiancée but had no place to reside, they did not want to impose on Phil and Cam, so Phil inquired if they could rent my house. I was excited at the opportunity to help my friends and give a home for a young couple. I told Phil to establish a moderate rent and that they saved the remainder for their child's schooling. Cam's grasp was so strong that I worried she'd shatter my ribs again, and Phil's eyes welled up with tears. The next day I contacted Party 2, explained the situation, and asked if I may stay with her briefly. She was ecstatic and started preparing activities for us. 3 weeks later, I locked my house for the last time, shedding a few tears on my way to Phil's. To return the keys, I gave John the pink slip for his automobile and suggested he give it to his son as a housewarming gift. After exchanging hugs and emotional goodbyes and promising to keep in touch, I set out after a relaxing 2E road journey. I arrived at Patty's apartment. I took my time stopping whenever I wanted and staying for a long. Patty embraced me with huge hugs, only stopping when I gasped for oxygen. She escorted me to my room and told me that we were going out to dinner with a buddy. Casual clothes was encouraged, so I chose slacks and a shirt. We went to a charming diner with a tent of waiters and a well-stocked bar. As we entered, I understood I'd been set up. Jen's sister Fiona was already sitting at our table. Initially, I felt a flicker of rage, but Patty's charm swiftly cured it. As she approached the table, Fiona heartily hugged Patty before startling me with her own hug, expressing her contempt for Jen and her desire for her death. Fiona lived nearby and worked in accounting for an advertising business. The evening went pleasantly, and Amy was the first to draw me into the dance floor. When the occasion arrived, we did a couple of waltzes and a slow dance before returning to a beaming Patricia. "You two look so good together out there, like a real couple," she said with a smile. Fiona reneged dramatically, leading me to immediately excuse myself for the restroom. I spent the remainder of the evening dancing with Fiona and Patty, avoiding slow music. Later, we summoned a cab for Fiona and reserved another for ourselves. Back home, I taunted Patty about organizing the event, but she just laughed and went to bed. The following day, we started looking for a house. I preferred a house over an apartment because I liked the routine of keeping a yard and mowing the lawn. Additionally, it would be ideal for organizing barbecues or gatherings despite the high house costs in New York City's commuter belt I made. The decision to invest after several weeks of looking, I decided on a 3-bedroom starter home with a kitchen, dining room, and separate lounge, its reasonable-sized back garden, and front grass were nice, but what really hooked me was its position in a private community with only one security guarded. Access to the community included family amenities such as a pool gym and play area as well as babysitter services. Patty joked about moving in with me, but I took it lightly before moving in. I needed to furnish and decorate the space as well as buy all of the necessities such as towels, pots, and pans. Fortunately, it already had kitchen appliances, but I still needed to stock up on food and other supplies. Fiona and Patty were extremely helpful in leading me through the buying process, ensuring that the place had a feminine touch and seemed more like a pleasant home than a macho cave. I set aside one room for my workspace, which included a high-end computer with a motherboard. I designed an operating system, a workbench, numerous cabinets, and a fire-resistant safe. Patty and Fiona encouraged me to host a housewarming party because I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood. The guest list was largely composed of parties and Fiona's friends. It seems that their objective was for me to develop new contacts, which happened. I found myself exchanging contact information with several people and engaging via social media in the coming weeks. The house was packed with parties and barbecues. Practically every weekend I realized I was enjoying my newfound fame and hardly thought about Jen anymore during this time. Fiona and I had gotten closer than just friends, but not lovers. One evening, I was supposed to accompany Fiona and Patty to the theater, but Patty cancelled at the last minute, alleging stomach pains, so Fiona and I went alone to watch The Taming of the Shrew. Fiona stretched out and took my hand, which surprised me, given that our previous encounters had been restricted to a peck on the cheek. After the show, we took a taxi back to Fiona's apartment complex. As I walked her to the door, the taxi drove away, leaving us stranded. I cursed under my breath, knowing it would be impossible to find another cab so far from town. Fiona chuckled and recommended that I stay the night. Walking over to Miles's house was excellent. Then she leaned in for the most passionate kiss I'd ever had, taking my hand and guiding me inside. We did not waste any time. She brought me into her bedroom, and before I knew it, we were in a passionate embrace. I stood in her bedroom, perplexed, when she said, "What does a girl have to do to make love to you?" I had been waiting so long that I felt it was time to take the initiative. With these remarks, she began to accompany to the bed. It was great. The time passed unnoticed. "What did you do to me? My sister must be insane to let you leave, but I am grateful to her for that. I never want to be without you. Maybe I won't get out of this bed." Exhausted but satisfied, we lay there till daylight, then fell asleep again. We awoke about 1 p.m. and decided that nourishment was more important than another session. We strolled down to the adjacent deli and grabbed some lunch and coffee. Following our supper, we returned to Fiona's place and had a chat about recent events. Fiona admitted that she had harbored affections for me since our first meeting and secretly admired her sister following our breakup. She confided in the party about her feelings and asked for her help in bringing us together. Party, naturally thrilled, was confident that after I got over Jen, I would reciprocate Fiona's interest. I confessed that I'd been attracted to her since I first saw her at parties, but I was hesitant to make advances on my wife's sister for fear of being inappropriate. "I didn't want you to think it was simply a rebound," I explained, "so I maintained my distance." Fiona showed compassion and gratitude for my consideration of her sentiments before making a move, but she also indicated her impatience, disclosing that she and the party had planned the events of the previous night. We had a good laugh over their plot, and Fiona immediately messaged, "Patty mission completed." I'm still dressed from the night before and need to change. Fiona accompanied me home for a wardrobe update. Unlike her sister, Fiona emanated a sense of ease and comfort, free of the anxiety that frequently preceded Jen's emotions. We simply focused on the fact that Patty had expressed her delight at our newfound relationship several times. During that period, I dedicated myself to building my idea, which was eventually completed. The versatility of this software and technology was very impressive. It could be adapted for a variety of purposes, including military applications, gaming, aeronautics, both commercial and small aircraft, and even automobile applications. I chose to approach a famous gaming business, sure that comprehensive testing by players would reveal any flaws initially received with suspicion because they believed they had the greatest programmers. I exhibited my innovative technique. They consented to a 3-month trial period in which I gave a sealed unit with tamper-proof software. Following the trial, they had a meeting attended by my sister, a business attorney, and a colleague skilled in negotiating. We discussed the next steps. The gaming business indicated interest in purchasing the patents, offering a handsome $120 million, knowing they could benefit even more from global game sales. I rejected, instead offered to sell manufacturing rights on a 10-year license for $50 million UPF front and a 1% override on all applications using my technology. Following negotiations, we agreed to $65 million upfront and a 0.5% override over. The same term contracts were signed and a handshake finalized the transaction. With agreements in place with major military aircraft suppliers, civil aviation companies, and an automobile manufacturer, my financial fortune increased dramatically. I was now worth more than $250 million after taxes, with a 10-year prediction of more than $3.5 billion. The scale of my newfound riches was astonishing, and I sought advice on investment possibilities. According to a conservative estimate, leaving it in the bank would yield more than $122,000 in interest before tax. Fiona and I had moved in together, and she had decided to lease out her flat. Meanwhile, my sister had found a new lawyer and was developing a serious connection with him. It had been just over a year since I left to start new, and I felt it was time to seek payback against the two people who had caused me so much anguish. I confided in Fiona, stating my desire for retribution against her sister and asking whether she was okay with it. Her response was unambiguous: burn this soil, and if there is anything I can do to help, please let me know. We spent some time thinking several situations, but we ultimately decided to postpone our revenge and wait a little longer. The phone rang shortly after we had finished our dinner. It was the assistant district attorney for Freestone, Texas. They had caught the assassins who had attacked me and wanted my testimony in 3 weeks. Naturally, I agreed. When the time came, Fiona insisted on joining me, so we made a decision: make it a brief vacation and arrive a week before the trial. We traveled 600 miles to Texas, where Phil picked us up at the airport and took us to our motel. As a token of appreciation, we treated Phil and Cam to dinner at the Regency Club restaurant. Cam and Fiona looked great in their evening outfits, outperforming Phil and me. Phil wore his nicest sun suit, while I wore my new $2,000 handcrafted Italian suit. Together, the four of us appeared to be wealthy vacationers. We had never eaten at this restaurant before because it was too expensive. Before my newfound money, we arrived at the restaurant in a limousine, which I wanted to make extra memorable for Phil and Cameron. A uniformed doorman kindly opened our car doors for us. Later, the entryway of the restaurant. When we entered, the head waiter greeted us and led us to our seats. Soft music played in the background, adding to the atmosphere. Phil and Cam were excited about the evening ahead. We began with a light appetizer of melon and thinly sliced Parma ham, followed by our choice of main meal, complemented by a fruit salad, and finished with both a full-bodied red and a white dessert wine as we approached. At the end of our dinner, our thoughts moved to the dancing floor. Looking around the restaurant, I noticed Jen and her husband. Carl, sitting opposite from us with another couple, I pointed them out to everyone, forcing Fiona to excuse herself. To the powder room, and Cam followed suit. Their coordinated departure was a frequent occurrence that perplexed the couple as they passed Jen's table. Fiona halted to greet us, waving towards Phil and me. Jen seemed taken, surprised her. Hand flew to her lips in shock. Whatever Fiona said next made Cam giggle as they proceeded on their walk, leaving Jen. Looking nervous, she left the restaurant quickly without saying anything. Carl came in close behind when the ladies returned. I asked what prompted Fiona's reaction. Cam recounted that after greeting Jen, she asked who Fiona was with, to which Fiona responded, "I'm with another millionaire sitting over there," referring toward me. She then continued, "I must thank you for leaving your husband. We're designed for one another. I just don't see what you see in this stuffed monkey. You clearly TRA down before." Walking away, the rest of the evening was spent dancing and laughing over Fiona's interaction with her sister since Cam and Phil had to work. Fiona and I indulged in tourist activities, including sightseeing and a day at a gun ranch, where we shot various guns. I was shocked to see that Fiona was a pretty good shot. Much better than me. In the evening, we went out to dinner and danced extensively the night before the trial was supposed to begin. We had supper at Phil and Cam's place, and I must say a home-cooked meal outperformed dining out. By far after dinner, Phil announced that his son will marry his fiancée in the spring, and we all drank to their approaching wedding. Before the trial opened, we met with the assistant district attorney, Adaa, who guaranteed us of an easy triumph. The ringleader of the trio had been caught thanks to my gift of his DNA. It transpired that he had a history of violence, making this his third strike, and thus encouraging him to assist by implicating his cohorts who were already in detention. Their trials would follow his, and with his testimony, they were set for severe penalties. Additionally, I learned that the man I had punched in the throat was suffering from vocal damage equivalent to a frog's croak. However, none of the three were willing to incriminate Carl Prescott, the aider. Suspected Prescott of buying them into quiet, knowing that accusing his son of conspiracy to commit murder would offend his important father, a congressman. We attended all three trials, and I found the outcome satisfactory. The ringleader received a reduced 15-year sentence for betraying his friends. The one I heard in the throat received only a 2-year sentence, since he did not actively participate in the assault, while the other received 5 years, his first offense. Upon parting ways, Phil and Cam drove us to the airport, and I handed Phil an envelope directing him not to open it until after departure. Inside were the deeds to my former house, meant as a wedding gift for his kid. With the understanding of the fragility of marital vows, after we returned home and unpacked, I withdrew to my office and dialed my sister, extending an invitation for dinner on Friday evening without alerting Fiona when Friday arrived. I informed Fiona that we were dining out with Patty, and her boyfriend Fiona was thrilled, and that evening we were escorted to a fancy restaurant that I had reserved 3 weeks previously. As we drank our wine following a beautiful supper, a man costumed as a gypsy approached our table, serenading us with a love ballad on his violin. The entire restaurant watched as I knelt down and proposed to Fiona. Her expression was wonderful as she tearfully replied, "Yes." Amidst the overwhelming ovation from fellow diners, Patty embraced Fiona, welcoming her to the family. We danced the night away before the limo carried us home. Our wedding was arranged for Early spring, with invites sent out promptly wisely, I took a back seat in the preparations, leaving Fiona and Patty to take charge. We chose a nearby church for the wedding, and I covered all for out of. Town guests booking an entire floor at the Hilton for their 3-day stay. The wedding was a magnificent ceremony loved by all. Phil and Cam mentioned that they hadn't had such a fantastic time in years and extended an invitation to their son's wedding in 2 months. Fiona and I embarked on a 2E cruise through the Caribbean, complete with nightly dances and daily excursions. Upon our return, we felt absolutely spent and craved for another holiday. Fortunately, I had assembled a troubleshooting team to handle any issues that could occur with my new application and hardware, leaving me with little to occupy my time with things decided. I turned my attention to the next part of my revenge, taking a patient. Method, I played the lengthy game, feeling no need to haste. 9 months later, our son, James, was born, followed by his sister Sarah, a year after we had transferred to a larger home within a gated neighborhood by then. I had gained cash and found myself nearly a public figure, attending different charity events where I gave liberally. Fiona and I even graced the pages of society magazines, portrayed as the ideal pair. Yet as time passed, I remained steadfast in my pursuit of revenge. The hurt imposed upon me by their acts lingered nearly 9 years after my ex-wife abandoned me for someone else. It was time for phase 1. Over the past 5 years, I'd recruited a private investigation firm to gather material on Jen Carl and anyone related to them, particularly her ex-boss, Troy Simmons. My suspicion lingered that Troy was the father of Jen's twins, and I was keen to collect his DNA profile. The investigators uncovered out some horrific things. First, the twins were genuinely from Troy, which verified my assumptions. Secondly, Jane was in a relationship with Troy, and 2 other guys. Finally, Carl, throughout his trips, fell into adulterous encounters with his personal assistant and numerous girls of easy virtue. I launched the first step of my plan. I sent Carl a sample of the twins and Troy's DNA, along with a statement stating you're sterile. Markings, DNA doesn't match Troy Simmons's. Do the math with this revelation. It became apparent that the twins weren't mine, showing that Jen had been connected with Troy while being with Carl. The essence, she was cheating on both of us concurrently. To add to Carl's comprehension, I emailed him evidence of Jen's ongoing affairs. Then I calmly anticipated the repercussions. About 2 months later, Phil called me to advise that Carl had kicked Jen out and exploited their prenuptial agreement to keep custody of the children, whom he had officially adopted. Jen left with nothing, disappearing without a trace. Naomi phoned her parents only to discover that her father had sent her some money and shut off further connection. Phase 1 was complete. Jen now tasted the sting of treachery and loss of her children. Apparently, she still had access to her email as it remained active. Deciding to spice things up, I emailed her the private investigator's report on Carl, along with some incriminating images of him with other women that should change things up in the divorce procedures. A few days later, Fiona and I were seated watching an old movie when the intercom from the security gate buzzed. The guard on duty inquired if a Mrs. Prescott could come to our residence. I asked him to wait a minute so I could consult with Fiona. She appeared as perplexed as I was, but agreed, saying, "Let's hear what she's got to say." So I instructed the guard to let her in. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Fiona opened it to show what I can only describe as a complete disaster. Her hair appeared untidy. She wore no makeup, and her clothing looked like they had been worn to bedhead. Fiona beckoned her in, and as she entered, I realized she couldn't meet my sight. Fiona offered her coffee, which she accepted. Jen sat down across from me, but still avoided looking at me, causing me to initiate the discussion. I was still enraged with her, but part of me felt sorrow for the shattered figure before me, a figure I had played a part in breaking, which left me feeling somewhat guilty until I realized what she had done to me. "You look dreadful. What happened?" I exclaimed. At that, she fully broke down, weeping uncontrollably. It took us 10 minutes to calm her down enough to speak, and through sobs, she began to explain. He somehow found that the twins weren't yours and that I was connected with Troy during our relationship. It wasn't difficult for him to figure out. Then he heard that I continued to see Troy even after we got. He became irate and threw me out in just the clothing I was wearing. I still had my car keys and laptop in my car, along with a couple of $000 in my account, so I checked into a motel. However, nobody wanted to talk to me after what I had done to you. I lost all my friends and my family disowned me. I attempted to call his Father Barry, who informed me that he now had his heir to the family riches and didn't need me anymore. I reached out to my dad, who reluctantly consented to talk with me and sent me some money, directing me not to call again with nowhere else to go. I took the rest of my money to come here, hoping Fiona would show me some sympathy. I know you wouldn't lift a finger to aid me, even if I were in grave straits, and I don't anticipate any aid from you if it carries any significance. I really regret my conduct. I was self-centered and nasty, and I accept the consequences, but I miss my children and want them back. I may have been a bad wife, but I actually was a fantastic mother," she interrupted her well-prepared statement and glanced at us with the appearance of a wounded animal, despite being aware of her rehearsing what she uttered, essentially accurate, and without my will, I couldn't help but feel terrible for her. Moreover, I held a deep animosity towards Carl, as he had organized my agony, and his reckoning was rapidly approaching. There was also a debt owed in the shape of a beating, but that might be postponed when Fiona questioned if Jen was hungry. She said she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Fiona swiftly whipped up some bacon eggs, hash browns, followed by pancakes and syrup. Jen ate them excitedly, wanting more coffee, which Fiona graciously delivered. Subsequently, Fiona brought her to the guest bedroom for a shower. While Jen was occupied, Fiona located some clothing that would fit her and left them on the bed. As Jen showered and dressed, Fiona and I discussed about what to do with our surprise visitor. Despite her hate for Jen, Fiona felt a familial obligation to support her, a sentiment I tentatively shared, largely because it would irk Carl to witness Jen's tenacity. We decided to have Jen remain in the guest bedroom temporarily early while we thought out alternative arrangements. Tomorrow, Fiona intended to take Jen clothes shopping at Walmart. When Jen returned downstairs, she appeared much more rejuvenated. We delivered the great news about her circumstances, which drove her to cry again shortly after we all went to bed. Fiona and I stayed up chatting until the early hours, making decisions we hoped would assist untangle the issue. I generally rose early to go to the gym and pool, but Jen had beaten me to it already, cooking coffee and buttered toast. Fiona was already seated at the table eating, so I joined her, and Jen came down with us. Mark, I never expected such a warm greeting. I'm really appreciative, and I'm at a loss for words. Jen, what you did was extremely upsetting. As you now understand, after feeling the anguish of losing your own family, I believe you finally grasp the enormity of the hurt you caused me. However, owing to Fiona and the love we share, I think I can begin to forgive you. I'll never forget your deeds, but I refuse to dwell on them any longer. I don't want you to apologize anymore. This chapter is closed, and a new one has begun this morning. I'd like you to go shopping with Fiona for essentials at Walmart while I seek for a home for you to live. We'll get you more appropriate clothes later. Now I'm off to the gym. See you. Later, when I returned home, the girls were away, and the kids were at school, causing me to begin hunting for lodging. For Jen taking a chance, I contacted the housing officer for our guarded community, who informed me about a one-bedroom starter home available for rent just 2 streets away upon inspection. I was pleasantly surprised to find it fully furnished and move-in ready. The owner, an army officer, posted to Europe, 3 years, was looking to rent out his residence. After rigorous scrutiny, I paid a year's rent up front, along with the damage deposit upon the girl's return with an excess of garments. I relayed the good news. Fiona simply smiled and blew a kiss, while Jen embraced me, expressing thankfulness. Through tears, then, she became perplexed. I do not know what came over me that made me imperil our marriage. It was like being hit by a beam from some Martian lady of easy virtue. I should never have let you leave, Fiona. Please take care of him. You won't find a better dude. And I know. Afterwards, she hurried upstairs. To conceal her tears while alone, I confided in Fiona about my intentions to assist Jen and ruin Carl and his father. The following day was spent to collecting supplies for Jen's new apartment. We filled Fiona's van and arranged for the remaining items to be delivered. I harbored misgivings about whether there would be sufficient space in the house for all our purchases, but the girls managed to find a spot for everything, reminiscent of my Annie's magical purse from Harry Potter. In order to enhance Jen's sense of freedom, we chose to provide financial help. We transferred $10,000 into her bank account and issued her a credit card with a monthly limit of $1,000. Tears and embraces were exchanged all around that evening as we lay in bed. Fiona expressed her pride in me for not kicking Jen while she was down, and for being so sympathetic. I could only hope that Jen had gained a lesson from this experience and would treat her future spouse with more respect. The following day, we all convened at Jen's house to assist her in settling in. Despite our efforts to help, Jen insisted on doing all the household tasks herself and began cleaning every nook and cranny, although it was already quite tidy later. She called us over for supper, emphasizing her intention to create something special for us, arranging for a babysitter to watch the children. We made the 5-minute walk to her apartment once. There, Jen seated us and offered a spectacular lunch, comprising a quality cut of beef, baked potatoes, and an array of veggies, including one of my favorites, excellent beans combined with carrot, fingers and parsnips coated in garlic butter and honey, wrapped in foil and baked for 25 minutes for dessert. She offered baked pastry apples packed with raisins topped with ice cream. We exited, feeling fully satisfied. Eyes over the coming weeks, Jen settled in, and Fiona and I committed to assisting her with her divorce. I planned an appointment with a lawyer recommended by Patty Bryan Scott. Upon arrival, I told him about Jen's situation. Despite his worries about her treatment of me, he agreed to represent her. Our primary objective was regaining custody of the children, unconcerned about money matters. As I ensured I would tackle those, I presented a strategy. I had previously granted permission for Carl to adopt to the children, implying they might not be biologically mine. Voiced doubt, causing me to confess that I had denied a $1 million offer for the children and had authorized Carl's adoption without financial motivation. Instead, I sought a $10 million settlement for emotional pain, implicating both Carl and XYZ. Advertising this arrangement reached to shield XYZ reputation with a non-disclosure agreement in place. Brian questioned about confirmation of paternity, to which I submitted DNA testing confirming Troy Simons as the biological father, so the adoption wasn't legally binding, and Carl had no legal claim over the children, so Jen could retake custody. It wasn't simply for Jen's sake, it would also affect Carl and his father, but my interest was largely for the well-being of the children. I knew they were adored. They merely wanted someone with their surname to continue. The family business, Brian said he'd handle it and come back to me that evening. I confided in Fiona about what I'd done, and she fully backed my decision. We invited Jen over. At first, Jen seemed skeptical, but once I explained the situation, she hugged me gratefully. However, soon after she realized the significance of her actions and stepped back, covering her mouth, overtaken with emotion, and apologizing. We calmed her, saying not to worry, and left it at that. A few days later, Brian got in touch with me, seeking a meeting at his office and urging me to bring Jen along, as he was representing her, not me. The three of us convened in his office, where he outlined his proposal. One, he advocated filing a motion to nullify the adoption. Two, he planned to alert the district attorney's office that both Carl Prescott and his father, Barry Prescott, had attempted to acquire 2 children, breaking the anti-slavery statute of 1865-3. They had pressured Mr. Mike into authorizing the adoption, which was invalid as the children were not fed by Mr. Adams, supported by DNA certificates for Mrs. Prescott asked the immediate return of her children, now imprisoned against her will. 5. A lawsuit will be brought against Mr. Troy Simons for pestering and pushing Mrs. Adams to commit adultery in order to keep her employment. 6. Legal action would also be taken against Mr. Carl Prescott for forcing Mrs. Adams into a relationship resulting to the breakdown of her marriage. 7. Court cases would target XYZ Advertising for tolerating and even promoting the affair, with CEO Carl Prescott and Barry Prescott being aware. And supportive 8. Mr. Mark would sue Mr. Troy Simons for alienation of an affection, contributing to the breakdown of his marriage to Mrs. Emma Adams. 9. Mr. Adams would also sue Mr. Carl Prescott for alienation of affection, holding him responsible for the breakup of his marriage. 10. Legal action would be filed against XYZ Advertising for omitting to implement their morals provision in employee contracts despite knowing about the affair between Mr. Simons and Mrs. Adams. 11. Additionally, legal action would be filed against XYZ Advertising for not enforcing their morals clause and even supporting the affair between Mr. Carl Prescott and Mrs. Adams, leading to the collapse of Mr. and Mrs. Adams's marriage. 12. Mr. Mike acknowledged signing a non-disclosure agreement for $10 million and committed to fulfill it by repaying the cash if necessary. After examining Brian's proposal, touching not only XYZ Advertising but also Troy Carl and his father Barry, we were all left in shock. It surpassed any retaliation I had dared to contemplate. I encouraged Jen to brace herself, as when the situation worsened, she would inevitably face its repercussions. She understood her role in bringing this upon herself and was ready to withstand the fallout. I instructed Brian to move forward at the earliest opportunity. I planned to expose XYZ2 to the media through a multi-dimensional campaign primarily targeting Troy Simons, Carl Prescott, Barry Prescott, and ultimately XYZ Advertising. Brian assured preparedness within 2 weeks, during which he would seek to annul the adoption and reconnect Jen with her children. Leaving Brian's office, we felt a newfound purpose, and I sensed justice on the horizon, despite Brian's efforts to regain custody. Carl and Barry gathered a team of lawyers to dispute the case in the second week of the judicial struggle. Brian launched the remaining actions as agreed. I sent the acquired material to various media sources a week later. This hastened the judicial proceedings. Once the media received wind, they besieged the courthouse and the residences of individuals implicated, just as I feared. A wave of clients from XIZPR and Advertising either terminated their contracts or threatened to do so. This caused an emergency meeting of XYZ board of management, resulting in Troy Simons being terminated without severance pay. Both Carl and Barry Prescott were driven to quit in an attempt to stem the loss of their renowned clients. Additionally, they promised to pay a considerable sum to both Jen and myself, along with the settlements I anticipated from my prior court battles. I would more than recoup the $10 million I had to repay for failing to maintain confidentiality. During the pandemonium, there was a silver lining for the American people. Congressman Barry Prescott resigned, owing to health difficulties threatening his re-election campaign centered on family values. Shortly after his departure, irregularities were uncovered in his use of campaign funds, including costs for a tourist cruise and recruiting girls of easy virtue during the election campaign. He received summons from a select committee and inquiry from the FBI, questioning his behavior. Less than a month after my disclosure to the media, all claims were addressed, and Jen's children were reunited with her. Following their return, Fiona and I took Jen and the children to her parents' home for a reconciliation. I expressed to her parents that I had forgiven her, and while we might not be friends, we were at least on polite terms. I persuaded them to grant forgiveness as well, especially because they were meeting their grandchildren for the first time, which definitely eased their hearts. Barry Prescott was convicted of abusing campaign funds and handed a 3-year prison sentence. I eventually responded against Carl Prescott, who was found guilty of attempting human trafficking by trying to acquire 2 infants he was also convicted of. Embezzling company cash to offshore accounts were uncovered, each holding a considerable sum of money sent from his office computer. I wonder how that happened. He earned a 5-year sentence in federal prison. Originally, he was slated for 3 years, but he refused to disclose the whereabouts of the remaining missing cash. Actually, he didn't realize I had organized it. My ultimate vengeance for planning my assault was bribing the prison allocator to put him with a known drug dealer who loved the companionship of males. Jen upgraded to a larger house, retook her bar examinations, and joined the same law firm as Patty. We occasionally each other's children, but never socialized. To this day, Jen has not been on a date. She has fully involved herself in her profession and caring for the children. Thank you for taking time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this article, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to relate regarding your someone else's situation, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.